The interesting thing about the word Amen at the end of prayers, which few people have considered, because we tend to treat it as a magical word that means to seal the prayer, to bring it about. In fact, in the Christian world, it's taught very loosely that Amen means let it be. But actually, there's been very little, if any, historical research or other research into the real origin of the word. The earliest that it appears in the Bible is by the prophet Isaiah, who was writing about 700 BC, which was before the captivity in Babylon. And he urged his followers, or the Hebrews and the Jews, to worship the Amen, the God of truth, which sets Amen apart as a deity, as a divine form, not as a concept or as a word with an attached meaning. So the Christian idea that it means let it be so is actually erroneous and not connected to any tradition anywhere. Having talked to Hebrew scholars about the word Amen, it seems that they generally have assumed that it comes from a Hebrew word which is imanu, or otherwise imuna, which means belief. And obviously that's fairly close to let it be in a meaning sense. But it's not actually the same thing, and nor is there any tradition relating to the word to say why it has been adopted. So we come forward in time to the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were written before and possibly during the time of Jesus, sort of 2nd century BC onwards. Some of those do draw reference to Amen and use it as a statement of divine invocation. They don't use it for anything else. Whereas other Dead Sea Scrolls don't use the word at all, which suggests that there was perhaps sects within the Judaic world which were using this word on this magical level. But we have no real evidence of Jesus having used it, of it having been employed in his time in any wider sense. However, 300 years later, the time of Constantine, Emperor Constantine, when the Catholic Church was being properly founded, then the word comes in and is used at the end of all prayers. And by the time of the King James Bible, of course, it's become very much a part of the religion. And it's curious, as I say, because there is no tradition around this. And you look, when you have a word which is used at the end of everybody's prayers within a religion which has taken over at some periods of history the whole world, just about, you look for a tradition, you look for some meaning, some rooted thing. Amen was actually a god of Egypt, and he wasn't just a god. There were many gods in the pantheons of Egypt, which represented or stood for many areas of people's lives. But Amen represented procreation. He was the God who was said to have given birth to the gods. He was the divine seed. He was actually called the Hidden One. And that relates to the tradition at the Temple of Karnak, where he was the presiding god, where they would have a golden statuette of Amun, or Amen, in his temple, which would be hidden away. And only the high priest, only the head priest would be allowed in all the year round. Only he would be allowed into the inner sanctum to give praise and worship to this statuette of Amen. One day in the year, the statue would be taken out of there and put in a box and paraded through the streets around Thebes. And Thebes was the capital city of Egypt, and it was also the city of Amun, or Amen. Anybody who's familiar with the Bible will be aware that Moses is said to have been raised in Egypt as a prince. Eventually he was exiled from Egypt, and he went to, well, some tradition has that he went to Ethiopia, and then after that he went to live amongst the Bedouins, the Ishmaelites, and following that he returned to Egypt, where he freed the Israelites. That was sometime 1400, 1500 BC, and it seems that 700 years later, at the time of Isaiah, this God, Amen, of the Egyptians, has been absorbed somehow into a core belief of the Hebrews, where initially there is no sign of it at the time of Moses, the time of David and Solomon. But after that time, 700 BC, we see this: you must worship the Amen, the God of truth. And this is being said by a prophet of a religion which is advocating one God. There were not pantheons of gods. They were not polytheistics, the Hebrews. They believed in one God. However, within the Hebrew culture there was also a schism. There were those in the north, the Israelites, who worshipped El or Elohim. And there were those in the south, the Jerusalemites, who worshipped Yahweh or Yahweh. And this division is actually borne out in the Bible. There are different parts of the Old Testament have been written by some of the scholars, the Hebrew scholars from the north, and other parts have been written by people in the south, which is why you get a lot of conflict within the Bible. Out of this conflict, Isaiah was perhaps taking advantage of people's ignorance and introducing this whole new order, this whole new way of thinking, which it seems to have been borne out by the kings at his time. There were two particular kings, one called Manasseh and his son Ammon, or Amen, who they introduced polytheism into the Hebrew world, and they introduced the Sumerian gods, the Babylonian gods, and paganist worshipping practices. And when the Jerusalemite priests, very famously known, rebelled against Manasseh and his new teachings, they were all slaughtered, all slain, none spared. And it was the end of an era of continuous Hebraic, not just scholarship, but practice and knowledge. So it would seem that at that time, and this is around the time of Isaiah also, it's within 50 years, at that time there was this inner revolution, this subversion of the established faith. And out of it comes this new concept of a God of truth, the Amen. So it seems very strange that Egypt, being the prime biblical enemy of the Israelite Hebrews, that they should have adopted the name of the principal god of Egypt as a magical word for their prayers, when in fact historical tradition shows that the Israelite Hebrews did the very opposite. They mocked and scorned all that was sacred to the Egyptians after the Exodus, after they had escaped from bondage. And the worrying thing of this affair is, has the spiritual intent of worshippers for the last 2,000 or more years been diverted? Has it been distracted towards an alternative deity? Has the pure intent of the worshippers of Yahweh and of El, the Hebrew gods, been, if you like, hijacked? And if it has, then it's a very serious issue, and all people who have any religious or spiritual belief and practice within that medium ought to really seriously think about what they're saying, because this is not a casual word, it's a magical word, and it has its own energy, and as such it should be spoken with knowledge, not with ignorance.